comes from the Arizona Inn, a four-diamond, family-owned historic resort hotel and restaurant on Elm Street near the U of A. Information is at arizonainn.com.
Hello everyone, I'm Tucson Weekly editor Jim Ninsel, and we're here to talk Zona Politics. The Arizona legislature wrapped up the 2017 session earlier this week, and joining me to talk about how it all shook out are two Tucson lawmakers from the House of Representatives. In District 10, we have State Rep. Kirsten Engel, a Democrat, and State Rep. Todd Clodfelter, a Republican. Thanks to both of you for joining me here.
Thanks, Jim. It's good to be here.
Great to be here.
So let's start off. Education is certainly one of the biggest issues we talk about in this state. Governor Ducey came out with the State of the State saying we needed to fund more. We needed more funding for teachers in particular, needed some raises. We have this teacher shortage with teachers leaving. Todd, how do you feel as though at the end of the day you guys did in terms of education funding, in particular teachers?
Well, Jim, the education funding is always the key topic in Arizona. It seems to be year to year. I think we did okay. I would like to have seen a lot more pay raises for the teachers. We were trying to find a methodology of doing that, at least in our caucus. We were trying to figure out whether we did a direct pay from the general fund, or we gave the money to the districts and allowed them to apportion it the way they would do normally. But the question was, would it get done in that fashion? Because so often the monies that the teachers have been getting as raises have come from maintenance of the facilities of the schools too. So if you give them the money to give teachers raises, they're also losing that potential return of money to do maintenance on their facilities. So we had some discussion on how to do that. Always, I think we need to pay our teachers more because they're a key element in quality education in Arizona.
Kirsten, your thoughts on how it all played out?
Well, not so well. I think we're, possibly we've stepped backwards. The governor came out with, very strong that he was going to support teachers, he was going to put money into education, and really we saw very little at the end of the day. We saw a 2%, really, we think it's really a bonus. Money going into teacher salaries, it's really just for this year and next year. Probably less than $1,000 in total, and there's no guarantee it will continue. We saw this multi-billion-dollar lawsuit that was filed the week of the budget for the fact that the state has not funded building repairs. And we had a lot of people talking to us about crumbling buildings, unsafe buses, unsafe playgrounds, and yet what? I think it was something like $17 million went into facility repairs. And then we had the vouchers, the voucher bill. And all of us are very concerned that that's going to take even more money out of public schools. I want
to get back to the ESAs, the vouchers, but I first want to ask about the whole building maintenance and repair that you brought up, and let Todd talk a little bit about it. Concerned about that as well?
Absolutely. Kirsten and I actually visited Tucson High School as one of the examples in Tucson Unified School District, and you can see actually where they have actually run out of money to restore some of the facilities, which means that they can't access them because of asbestos issues and whatnot. They literally ran out of money, so you can walk from one end of the building where they've closed the door into the next portion of the building, and they're using it for storage because the ceilings are caving in, the floors are abysmal, the lockers are in poor repair, or they need to be replaced completely, and they just don't have the funds to do it. And that's just one school. There's some of the elementary schools, for example, that they're patching their air conditioning systems together. They've been functioning for over 30 years, and they can't even get parts for them now. Their maintenance guys are having a real challenge with keeping up with just making them operate from day to day, rather than doing any kind of replacement, which could cost several $1 million for each one of those units.
So why doesn't the state come up with the money to deal with this, Todd?
That's a good question, Jim. I agree with Kirsten on the ESA vouchers. I think that's not going to do us any good. I voted against the ESA vouchers. They call them vouchers. They're actually ESA because vouchers are technically illegal, I guess, by Constitution. I just think yeah, I know it's the same thing. I just think it's not going to do our general fund any good. One of the questions in mind that always comes up is where the money is spent when it does get apportioned. I think that we really need to evaluate that in a higher regard. We know that we need to spend more money on teacher salary, teacher retention, and facility repair. But at the same time, we also have to realize that almost 50% of our general fund budget is spent on education, and that's a real challenge. When we have certain amounts of income and certain amounts of outgo, and the bucket of money is only so deep, it has to be spent in ways to maintain the operation of the state. I think we need to evaluate where that money's going and how much needs to be done. One of the areas I think we could look at is prison reform and sentencing. I think that's an area where we could maybe pull some money out of prisons and put it into education, because after all, educated students are less likely to have to go to prison. So I think there's value in that. There's also some of the departments that I think, as I've done some research, that are sitting on some reasonable amounts of money that they're not allowed to spend, but yet they're not allowed to take either, or they're not allowed to spend it, but it's sitting there. The state hasn't swept it, which they've done in the past. That needs to be evaluated. I think there's some millions of dollars that need to be looked at. And that's part of the challenge of being a legislator, is to find these little caveats and these little nooks and crannies where money is that we can pull back out and use more efficiently and more appropriately.
Christian, your thoughts on where this money
Well,
should
I
come
don't think
from?
it's any big mystery where the money's going. I mean, this legislature, this session as well, is giving a lot of that money away. And we saw the Republican majority push through yet more corporate tax cuts this session, and not taking the Democrats up to reevaluate some of the existing tax exemptions and credits that we have in our tax code right now. And we just had a report that came out, you've probably seen it, Center for Investigative Reporting, that estimated something like $13.6 billion last year was lost in state revenues as a result of the continuation and the reenactment and extension of these kinds of credits. And we just extended another one yesterday. So we do have to do something about our shrinking revenues. I mean, education is 50% because the pie has shrunk. But we have to do something, and I think that there's a lot of attention. There's more of a spotlight now on this issue of where our money is going, and I'm hoping that maybe we can make some traction on that.
Todd, you're from the other side of the aisle. You agree in terms of looking at these exemptions?
I agree that there's some areas that tax cuts and exemptions could be reviewed and maybe pared down to a degree. The options are kind of philosophically different from the standpoint of you either, to pay your bills, you raise taxes on a vertical scale, everybody pays more, or you make a horizontal adjustment, you broaden the tax base. And the argument, of course, economically is you broaden the tax base, more people are employed, they're all paying a little bit in rather than more paying people less. Fewer people are paying more is what I'm trying to say. So the concept is to broaden the tax base, hence the tax cuts, to bring more corporations, more businesses in, to expand the economy, expand the base, put more people to work, at which point then your revenues would also increase. But Arizona's primary income sources are sales tax and personal income tax, with some property taxes in there based on some of the other legislative the laws. So what we have to do is we have to figure out how we're going to get more money. Like Kirsten said, we're going to raise taxes, deficit spend, or do we cut programs? I mean, that's kind of where it is when that kind of thing happens. If we have a problem with our economy, the economy tanks, goes up and down, sales taxes go down, therefore revenue goes down, and the property values are less, therefore property tax values are less. So it's a walking a tightrope, and trying to figure it out is a challenge.
And Todd, I wanted to ask you, we saw you're talking about if you reduce taxes, it creates an economic boom, but we've seen some evidence lately, and even former Governor Jan Brewer said maybe those tax cuts that she signed into law were a little too deep because they haven't resulted in the kind of economic boom that you had anticipated. Not you weren't there then, but that the lawmakers at the time anticipated. So what do you think of Governor Brewer's assessment that they may have been too deep?
I say that we need to reevaluate all of the angles of those tax cuts, whether it's a corporate tax cut, individual tax cuts. One of the things they were trying to do this year that we discussed was elevating the amount of deductions per individual. In the state of Arizona, it was only $100. but it was still $100. And if you add up the number of people that are paying taxes, that could have equated to a pretty substantial amount of money, which we did not choose to do, and some people were not very happy about that. So I think there's room for review, and that's what we try to do at the legislature. Is we work together and we try to figure out ways to make it better, come up with methods to broaden our tax base, increase revenue by increasing economic value in business. But at the same time, we need to walk that tightrope again of how we raise money, whether it's corporate tax cuts or raising individual taxes at the same time.
And go ahead, Kirsten. You had something you wanted to weigh in here?
Just wanted to, excuse me, turn off my phone there. Well, I do want to say that, this is really just trickle-down economics. I mean, I guess I would challenge my seatmate here to show me how these corporate tax credits have actually really brought new businesses into the state, because generally studies have shown that's not the case. And really these end up basically being ways for businesses that are already here or are going to come here anyway to just get a better deal. And if we're really looking at how we're going to expand our economy, we have to start investing in the things that we know will create jobs, and that's investing in education first and foremost. We know that businesses want an educated workforce, a trained workforce, and you and I together have worked on, we would both like to put more money into the JTED program. It's those kinds of investments that is really going to grow our economy. And these kinds of cuts to large manufacturing businesses, I think that's just throwing our money away. That's more trickle-down economics, which we know doesn't work.
Kirsten, you brought up the whole question of these ESAs, they're empowerment scholarship accounts, and Todd, you also were not in support of these, but Kirsten, very briefly, what is the concern with the ESAs? Basically, just so our viewers know, you basically are giving a debit card to parents who are participating in this program and not sending their kids to public schools, and then they can spend it on their education if they're homeschooled or if they're going to a private school. But where's your concern with this?
That's right. Well, for every one of these ESAs, vouchers that you give out, you are taking out that money from that school and putting it into a private school or a parochial school or homeschool or other options. And that is draining money out of our public school system. Now, yes, we do spend money per child for that school, but there's a whole thing there that if you keep on taking little pieces out of it, it's going to fall. The other thing is that it's just completely false to say that this is somehow creating choice for people. This ends up, I think, really to subsidize more wealthy parents in their choice of sending a child to a private school. If you look at the cost of a private school tuition, they are much higher than the value of these vouchers. So it's not going to be, for most students, really something that gives them really a choice to go anywhere else. Instead, it's going to subsidize a choice that's already been made. It's not something that a poorer family really could use this voucher and actually go to a private school.
Todd, you also oppose this, and similar reasons, or?
Yeah, similar reasons, Jim. The voucher program would generally take funds from the general fund, and it would diminish the amount of money we could spend on public education. I agree with Kirsten that some of these methods of dispersing this money would not be as favorable. They say it's to help the less privileged people go to more privileged schools, a higher level of education. But the problem is most of these people live in areas that's going to make it difficult or challenging for them to get their students from their home area to these schools. And the tuition is high enough to where the money that they would get wouldn't even help offset the cost of the tuition to begin with. A lot of these private schools, parochial schools and whatnot, they have programs. The state has a program with where you can write a tax credit to the school of your choice. They have abilities to have scholarships for the children that want to go to those schools. We already have school choice, in my opinion. You can send your kid to about any school you want to. You can send them to by choice, open enrollment. You can go to a private school. You can homeschool, And you could go, again, you go to a private or parochial school. The choice is there. It's the methodology of getting that child there and then funding that opportunity. So we're not taking choice away from anybody. We're just making it so that we don't undermine public schools at the same time. I'm a product of public schools. I went to Saguaro High School here in Tucson, and my children did as well, and TUSD has some wonderful, wonderful schools. Unfortunately, sometimes I think we only hear about the poorer ones, the ones that don't perform as well, and instead of doing an end run on that problem, I think we need to really focus on fixing the real problem. That's making our public schools the best that they can be.
All right, we're going to have to hold the conversation right there for a couple of minutes while we take a break, but we'll be right back. And all we talked about is education so far, so we need to hit some other topics. Stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back.
Zona Politics is made possible with the generous support of the Loft Cinema, Tucson's independent movie theater. The Loft features independent, foreign, and documentary films, cult classics, discussions with filmmakers, and much more, including the Loft Film Fest in November. The Loft is located at 3233 East Speedway Boulevard. Showtimes can be found at loftcinema.org. Support for Zona Politics is provided by Hotel Congress in historic downtown Tucson. More information at hotelcongress.com and 622-8848. The Tucson Hispanic Chamber of Commerce serves the business community in the bilingual, bicultural region of the Arizona-Sonora border and is a proud media partner with Zona Politics. Learn more at TucsonHispanicChamber.org.
All of these young people from the community come together, actually get up and do something.
We can do anything!
I think we've attracted a lot of people that are super passionate.
We're here at the No Ban, No Law.
If you come out of college, you have this experience, you know how things run, you have a huge leg up.
People who have ideas and who are dreamers, you know what I mean, who really want to get themselves out there. I think that they should come here.
What's the best miniseries?
And we're back with Zona Politics. I'm your host, Jim Ninsel, and we're talking about the recently wrapped legislative session with two members of the Arizona House of Representatives from Tucson, Democratic State Rep. Kirsten Engel and Republican State Rep. Todd Clodfelter. And we did talk a lot about education in the previous segment, so let's talk a little bit about some of the other stuff that went on there. I know one of the other very controversial bills involved citizens initiatives, and there were some new regulations put on about signature gatherers, how you can pay signature gatherers, also a new law requiring strict compliance, which means minor errors could lead to an entire petition drive getting tossed off on technical reasons by the courts. And Kirsten, you opposed this legislation.
I did oppose it. I think the citizen initiative process is a very important right that we have under the state constitution, and it's a right of the citizens to actually pass laws that maybe their legislature is not willing to do so. And since the founding of the state of Arizona, we have seen citizens take this up and get those signatures and pass things that were really important to them. And all of a sudden, we're now really, I think, weakening and undermining that right that we've had. And I've always been really proud that Arizona has this. It's sort of part of our frontier nature, that legislature isn't representing us. We're going to go to the ballot directly. We're going to go to the voters. And now we're just making it a lot more difficult. So there's been a real attack upon organizations that hire paid circulators. And given the over 100,000 signatures that need to be gathered in a short period of time, that's often the only way that sometimes these ballot initiatives can get on the ballot. And this new thing of a strict compliance, I mean, that's just sort of open season for throwing out signatures and petitions that might violate the margins or some other requirement that we have. So I think that this is a lasting change. I think it's not a good change. And I'm concerned about it.
I want to get Todd in here because you did support this legislation, Todd, and your thoughts on why it was the right thing to do.
Yeah, well, I believe in the citizens' initiatives too. I really do, because I voted on them many times myself. One of the things I think we need to do is we need to make this process as pure as it can be for the state of Arizona. There's areas that I agree with Kirsten on. Maybe we have too many signatures to be required in a too short of a period of time. That needs to be evaluated and looked at as well. Having paid signatures from out of state is not really an issue. How they want to pay them is kind of questionable, and I'm not necessarily 100% in favor of that either. But I think we need to keep this as pure as we can for the state of Arizona. The issues that you have with a citizens initiative is once it's on the ballot and once it's in the public's hands without tremendous scrutiny, it becomes law, it's constitutional. And then to make any amendment or change at all takes a 3/4 vote of the House and the Senate, and then it still has to go back to the people. So some people are concerned that this is taking the people's voice away. Nothing changes. All it has to do is it strengthens the requirements to get this on the ballot so it's reviewed thoroughly. First of all, if you look at most people look at the voter guide, the little newsprint thing that comes in the mail, and there might be a paragraph this big that says what an initiative is. And it's the talking points of what that initiative is. But if you really read the entire piece, it might be 150 pages long. So all of that information has to be slammed into that little area, and people maybe misconstrue what that really means. So the whole idea of having a legislature, and I'm not saying that the legislatures in the past have done the people's will, but this is today, and that was 20 some odd years ago when we had the Proposition 105, the Voters Protection Act, come into play. And that was to make sure that what law was passed and retained. That restricted the legislature from turning that back over. What we need to do is we need to make sure that those laws that are written are very thoroughly scrutinized. And that's why we have the processes at the legislature that we've just learned how to do. It goes from goes to the hopper, to the committees. It may not be heard in the committee. It may not be heard on the floor. It may be amended in 27 different ways. It may go to the Senate where it's not heard. It may be amended. It may not be heard again. If it goes to the governor, if it gets that far, it could be vetoed. So the reality is any law that goes into play is generally very highly scrutinized by a lot of very talented people from a lot of walks of life, because as a citizen legislature, we come from a lot of walks of life. So I think what this does is it really makes sure that a law that's going to go in as a citizen initiative is really scrutinized to the highest degree. So because when it hits the law books, it's there for a long time, and it's hard to change.
Well, we do have a referendum effort on this, so we'll see whether or not the people may have the final say on what these laws.
I just have to say, I disagree with Todd about, that the legislative process is always that deliberative. I wish that was always the case. But you know as well as I do that we received, amendments like this the morning we were expected to vote on that bill, just maybe 20 minutes later.
Right.
So deliberation is not always the standard at the Arizona legislature, and it certainly is not always with respect to every member of the legislature. And some of these citizen initiatives, there's a lot of scrutiny about them. I mean, they have to go out and talk to people at their homes and get their view about whether or not they're going to sign that petition. And, I recall, carrying around some initiatives when I was collecting signatures, and people would say, well, what's it about? And we would get into a conversation about it with the actual voters. And that's not something we can do on a day-to-day basis. So I think it's a good way of making laws, and the voters have decreed that the legislature just can't overturn it by a majority vote. That's what they want to do. If they want to change it, they can. So I think it's a good thing, and perhaps the legislature could learn something from the initiative process.
Well, all right. I want to tackle a couple more things, and we have about 4 minutes left. So, Todd, one of the pieces of legislation that you sponsored this session was $2 million for a memorial here in Tucson for the January 8th shooting, and I'm wondering if that did not end up getting passed, but were you disappointed that it didn't go anywhere?
Of course I am, Jim. It was an effort brought forth to me by some of the constituents who wanted to see it happen. It's been brought forward before the last couple of years by a couple other representatives from our area, and it was not passed then either. We modified the bill to give it a lot of contingency. meaning that the people of the community had to raise half of the money. They're looking at about $5 million. The bill was written for $2.5 million, $500,000 a year for 5 years in a row that had to be met again by public funding, private funding, and before the check, the state wrote a check for their share. And after 5 years, if it was not still made a national memorial as decreed by Washington, then the point was moot again anyway. So there was a 5-year contingency of raising $2.5 million by the private money and then adding the state share to that. The whole idea was to commemorate the shooting. We don't want that to ever happen again. It's not the Gabby Giffords Memorial. It's the memorial for the people who were killed. She is a survivor, and it's a tragedy that the community came together on, and that's what it signifies: is coming together in a tragic situation like that. I am disappointed that it didn't go further. It passed the House 49-11. It was not heard in the Senate. What we also did then was we worked to get it on the appropriation budget from the House, and it was there, but it didn't make it out of the Senate, and it didn't make it on the governor's budget either. So whether or not it'll rise again next year, we'll have to see, but hopefully the people of the community won't back down. They'll keep raising money and put forth the best effort and then show the state that they want it down here.
I'm sure that effort will continue. And Kirsten, you worked on environmental issues when you were at the Massachusetts Attorney General's office and at the EPA. And talk a little bit about your experiences working on environmental issues here at the legislature this year.
Well, I have to be honest, it's been a bit disappointing. I felt that the legislature, a majority of the members are a bit more interested in criticizing the federal government, especially EPA, than they are on working on improving our environment here in Arizona. And we had numerous examples of this. Todd knows what I'm talking about. We spent a lot of time crafting, discussing, and then ultimately passing letters to our congressional delegation, generally criticizing EPA, telling them that they were being too tough on the coal industry, that they should redo the Antiquities Act and change some of those requirements. Of course, the Antiquities Act is how we got the designation of the Grand Canyon. That EPA should roll back its ozone standard, and one thing Todd and I agree on is that the Phoenix air, which is out of compliance with ozone, is a whole lot harder to breathe than our cleaner air here in Tucson. So I think it was a missed opportunity, and I had several environmental bills. Just one of them got heard. So I hope that I can convince my fellow legislators that we need to work on Arizona's environment. And stop attacking EPA.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. I'm so disappointed because there's about 18 more topics to talk about what happened at the legislature, but we are out of time. So I want to thank my guests, Todd Clodfelter, Kirsten Engel, both state representatives from Legislative District 10, and that is our show for today. My thanks to our media partners at Tucson Weekly, Tucson Local Media, and Community Radio KXCI 91.3 FM, where a radio edition of Zona Politics airs on Sunday afternoons at 5 p.m. My thanks also to the gang here at Creative Tucson who make Zona Politics possible. If you want to check out the show online, you can find us at zonapolitics.com and at creativetucson.org. And be sure to follow us on Facebook. I'm Jim Ninsel. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Zona Politics is hosted by Tucson Weekly senior writer Jim Ninsel. The program is produced by Jennifer Powers Murphy and Danny Vinnick and edited by Jim Rundle. Special thanks to KXCI, Tucson Weekly, Brink Creative Digital, and all supporters who provide crucial funding for the program. Learn more about Zona Politics at zonapolitics.com and be sure to follow us on Facebook and Twitter.